us right now is Republican Senator Pat Toomey, who helped work on this legislation and is firmly behind it. And Senator, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Becky. Thanks for having me.
Have you been surprised by your colleagues' reaction to this legislation?
Well, not terribly surprised. We've been having this discussion literally several times a day, every day, for many, many weeks now. So I think we kind of know where everybody is. No big surprises in that sense, but it has revealed what I think is a path forward. So hopefully we'll find a way to get this done.
To those of us on the outside, it looks like the effort has been more and more splintered. The more people hear about it, the more they read it, the more they get the CBO score. So if you see a path to getting there, can you kind of fill us in on how that happens?
Well, yeah, first of all, the CBO score, we've discovered increasingly what nonsense it is. For one, they're using a baseline as a standard of comparison, a set of assumptions that come from March of 2016, when we know so much has changed in the insurance world since then. It's extremely inaccurate. But putting that aside, here's what I think is the path forward. Our moderate members are concerned that we're not going to spend quite as much money on Medicaid as Obamacare did, and they'd like to see us spend more money. Well, one area where there's a pretty broad consensus that we could spend some more money is addiction treatment, because it's hitting so many areas of our country so badly. On the other end of the spectrum, our conservative members want to see fewer regulations and more freedom so that we can have a more competitive, lower price marketplace for individual insurance. And I think there are some reforms that could still find their way into this bill that would achieve that. So, look, I'm not pretending this is easy. If it were easy, we'd have been done many weeks ago. But I do think there's a path forward.
We heard from Mitch McConnell, who the day before yesterday laid out and made some remarks at the White House where he said, look, we have two choices. We can either come together as a party and pass this legislation, or we can do it the other way, which is to sit down with the Democrats and try and come up with a bipartisan approach on that. He thinks that obviously the GOP would be in a less of a pole position to be negotiating some of the things that it wants to see happen in that situation. Was this an olive branch to the Democrats, or was this more of a threat to the GOP senators who have not signed off?
I think it's an honest warning, but it's much worse than the way you just characterized it, because Obamacare is completely failing. The individual markets are in a free fall. In my state of Pennsylvania, 40% of Pennsylvanians on the individual market have a grand total of one choice. Increasingly, there are counties across America where there are no choices. So this is failing, and we can't just sit here and let it completely collapse and let people lose their insurance. So if we can't get this done, we're going to have to turn to the Democrats, and they're going to insist on an Obamacare bailout. Just throw a whole lot of money at it, no reforms, no putting Medicaid on a sustainable path, none of it. And that would be a terrible outcome. And frankly, I mean, a big failure for the Republican Party. We've made a commitment that we're going to get this job done, move health care in a consumer-driven direction instead of a government-controlled direction, and we owe it to the American people to follow through.
Are you frustrated, Senator, that Republicans are not more interested, and some Republicans are not more interested in dealing with Medicaid? I mean, when you look at entitlement spending in the United States, most agree that that is where the problem lies when it comes to dealing with the budget down the road. And the Republicans have been the people championing that is where we really need to control spending. Well, and so it seems very counterintuitive that side of the aisle is now fighting for more Medicaid spending.
Look, it is frustrating. You're absolutely right. There's no honest person disputes that all of our budget problems come from the big mandatory entitlement spending programs. Medicaid is now the biggest net spender on that list, growing at a completely unsustainable pace. And you know what we're doing is we're doing this in the most gentle and responsible way possible. No one loses eligibility. No one gets thrown off. No money gets gutted from this program. We slightly slow down the rate at which it grows 8 years from now.
Right.
That's the right way to do it.
But there is a limit to states for Medicaid for the first time, and that has been the pushback we've heard from some of the Republicans who have come in here.
Becky, you're absolutely right. But for the first 8 years, that limit is allowed to grow so much that it's very unlikely a state would bump up against it. It's only after 8 years, when we curb the rate at which it can grow, that we're modestly bringing this under control, and we have to. The alternative is a complete fiscal disaster
So
at some point.
if this pushes off any of those curbs, is there a chance that this legislation passes and that 8 years from now or 6 years from now, as that deadline looms, that Congress picks it up again and says, wait a second, we can't have these severe cuts coming in right now, so we will extend?
And they're not severe cuts. It's a slight reduction in the rate at which the program grows.
Hypothetically speaking, if they're bumping up against those limits and the states are saying we don't have the money to fund this stuff.
Is there a danger that this gets unwound? Absolutely. There's always that risk, and that's why guys like me who've been fighting for these reforms, fighting to make this a sustainable program, you know, we're taking the risk that we'll be able to hold on to these reforms for 8 years when, let's face it, everyone, you know, every governor wants more money. It's great. It's free money coming from Washington that he gets to spend. So all the pressure will be to go in the other direction.
Senator, if this doesn't get passed, at what point do you wash your hands of it and try to just move straight to taxes?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet. I think there's still a path forward. And I think, by the way, virtually every member of our conference wants to get to yes. Obviously, it's much harder for some folks than others, but we certainly haven't given up.
Senator Toomey, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.